Vladislav stood alone near the nearly buried grave, his heart clutching at longing. Everyone who had attended his wife Elvira's funeral and burial had already left, but Vladislav couldn't take his gaze away from the small mound of earth inside the freshly painted fence with a small temporary monument covered solidly with wreaths. Love, remembrance, dear daughter, beloved spouse were written on the ribbons that surrounded the wreaths. Thoughts were jumbled, interfering with one another and disappearing unfinished. Vladislav took a seat on the bench next to his wife's grave. We'll find out her entire story at the end of the video, but first, like and share it with others and make sure you're subscribed and have the notifications bell turned on. The man buried his face in his hands and sobbed bitterly, just as he had done as a child when he lost his mother. Vladislav and Elvira first met at the Institute, where they instantly recognized one another. They met in the Institute canteen, sat at the same table, and never spoke again. They had a wedding after college, a cheap student wedding that was noisy and fun. The couple was assigned a small room in the company's dormitory after graduation. However, the newlyweds were overjoyed because they found each other from the start, rather than through trial and error. It was simply fate's decision to take a shortcut to happiness. Elvira was occupied with organizing things, and Slava worked, but he worked hard and diligently, and he soon achieved considerable success. It had become customary in their family for Slava to be the breadwinner and Elvira to be the home's hearth. This arrangement was imposed by the husband himself. It was important to him to come home to a cozy, newly received flat where everything was shining with cleanliness, and where there was always a table laid with lunch and dinner prepared by his wife's caring hands, and where he was always greeted at the threshold by the beautifully dressed Elvira. She assisted him in removing his coat. They sat at the elegant set table. When his wife questioned him about his day, he completely relaxed, surrendered to the power and warmth of love. He never refused his wife and spent a lot of money on jewelry and made thoughtful gifts. Fortunately, a man has attained a high position at work, which he's aided by the rear arranged by a caring wife. Vladislav had faith in his wife, and he had no one else. Their family served as an example of family loyalty and well-being. Even on long business trips where Elvira was unable to accompany him, the man had complete faith in his wife. She'd call her husband several times a day, reminding him of what he needed to eat and giving him advice. He dressed once in the dark, and that's something she'll never forget. The fact that he and his wife didn't have children was the only thing that bothered him. Things weren't going well. They went to a variety of specialized clinics but received no results. Then Vladislav offered his wife to take a child from the infant home, but they always met unexpectedly. Little helpless children in desperate need of parental love and tenderness. They were born unlucky, making them even more destitute. The wife steadfastly refused and only wanted their child. She was not going to accept someone else's. According to her, the child must have their physical and psychological characteristics. She had to think of it as an extension of both of them and wasn't going to agree to anything else. Vladislav was surprised by his wife's categorical refusal, but he accepted it and has never proposed adoption again. The couple now lived together, devoting all their love and attention to each other. Everything would have been all right, but trouble arose from unexpected sources. Vladislav was diagnosed with a malignant tumor, the last stage of which had been neglected and he couldn't be removed surgically. It was as if Vladislav's life had come to a halt. He was no longer aware of what was going on around him. His sick wife became the center of the universe at work, in the city, and around the world. The man took a long vacation from work because he had no one to look after Elvira. How many doors Vladislav knocked on in his search for a cure for Elvira's condition. How many times he persuaded, begged, and insisted Elvira agree to the surgery. Elvira found a hospital in Germany that would perform the surgery. Vladislav was torn apart by the sight of his wife, and his laugh turned away from his wife at such times, so she wouldn't see the tears streaming down his cheeks. One day the man was sitting beside his wife's bed, reading aloud an old novel when he fell asleep. He awoke in a cold sweat and grabbed Elvira's hand. "Elvira, darling, I had a dream that you left." Tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Elvira remained silent. She'd already drifted off to sleep, leaving him alone. It was as if he was snoozing. he was able to catch her last breath. Vladislav wept bitterly as he sat by Elvira's grave, unable to bring himself to return home. His kind and sweet Elvira, his beloved wife who had devoted herself to his care, would stay here underground. Eventually the man stood up and walked slowly toward the house, turning around every now and then to look for a new grave. Vladislav went into a bedroom and lay down on the side of his wife with his shoes on and lived for a long time, breathing in such a beloved smell, even though it was empty and cold at home, just as it was in his heart. It got quite dark. He sat down on the bed, turned on the nightlight, and took a framed photo from the nightstand. They were so upbeat and amusing. Unexpectedly, his fingers felt an inexplicable thickening in the frame. The man disassembled the frame, removed the glass, and discovered another picture behind it. An unfamiliar baby was depicted in the old photograph. Vladislav turned the photo over and read a mysterious inscription, which he didn't understand. There were no more interpretations. The man turned the photo in his hands for a long time, trying to figure out what it all meant, while the child's phonetic pronunciation was his own. Why the date when they'd been married for several years, and why, after all, did his wife keep this picture and also keep it a secret from him? Unbelievable suspicions began to form in his mind. He discovered a stack of letters after pulling out several drawers. It was Elvira's correspondence with her out-of-town childhood friend, Veronica. Taking up the last letter, he read through the greetings and gossip. And what a lovely boy he is! Vladislav's heart beat faster, squinting like his father. He, too, squinted when his eyes spoke. It couldn't be true, could it? He began by opening each letter in turn and reading from the first to the last word. Lines and letters flashed before his eyes, forming a distinct image. However, what exactly was it? It was unheard of, vile and shameful, a disgrace to his beloved good Elvira, whose decency he had never questioned. It turned out that he was on one of his lengthy business trips. His wife had carried and given birth to a child, his son, and had signed the necessary paperwork at the maternal hospital. The boy was born with a congenital heart defect, and doctors advised that he be left alone. Vladislav grabbed the boy's head and groaned, convinced he wouldn't live long. Unable to cope with his grief, the man went into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of vodka, and drank it down in one gulp. So he sat in the kitchen, drinking but not getting drunk, and not turning on the light until morning. At the first rays of the sun, Vladislav awoke, called a taxi, and went to his late wife's hometown to find that very friend, Veronica. A sleepy Veronica opened the door to Vladislav, who pressed the bell button and wouldn't let go of his finger. Slava. She was frightened by the man's odd appearance. What's the matter with him? Why is he here? Why do you guys think the story was behind this? Without answering, Vladislav entered the kitchen and motioned to Veronica to take a seat in front of him, and she couldn't understand. Vladislav pulled a photograph of the child from his inside pocket and tossed it on the table, and Veronica was humiliated. She was soaring through the sky on her wings. She wanted to give him a baby, but when he was born, he was discovered to have a heart defect, and they said he wouldn't live more than a year. Elvira was heartbroken, and she didn't want to irritate him, nor to subject him to such an ordeal. She loved him with no memory and chose to deal with her grief on her own. She only told the nurse about it, and she promised to follow the boy's fate and tell her everything. Veronica stated that he was 4 years old. He's both adorable and intelligent. He's now in an orphanage where she paid him a visit. Elvira used to send money for gifts all the time, but he hasn't been adopted. Nobody wants to adopt a sick child. Vladislav clenched his fist and slammed his fist down on the table. She has the audacity to deprive him of his own son? How could she make such an important decision on her own? After all, he's his son, and he was indeed his father. So he started to look for the orphanage's address. When the teacher brought out little Vitalik, the man caught his breath with tenderness, and his eyes tinged because this boy resembled his mother and him as a child. He extended his hand to the boy, and the youngster shook the boy's outstretched hand. Then he asked him for his name, and he told him he was actually his father, and the boy squinted his eyes incredibly, just like his father. DNA testing is used in court to determine paternity. Finally, Vladislav returned home with his son. First and foremost, the father and son underwent a thorough examination, which immediately confirmed the initial diagnosis. He contacted a clinic in another country, and Vladislav scheduled an urgent surgery. The boy was completely healthy a year after the heart surgery, but his father protected him from any unnecessary stress. The most important thing was that Vladislav had his own little family. He had a beloved son who at times terrified him because he reminded him of his mother. The father took his son to his mother's grave and explained that his mother had been ill for a long time and she was unable to take care of him. She's now transformed into an angel and she's watching over them from above and ensuring that they're doing well. What are your thoughts on this story, friends? How is this even possible? Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section. That concludes today's discussion. Make sure your browser's notification bell's turned on. Hopefully you'll keep it in mind at all times. We'll talk to you soon, and we bid you a farewell.